Do you know that we forget most of our dreams? Psychologists have long since proven that we actually dream every time we fall asleep, though most of these dreams are forgotten as soon as we wake up. So the question here is, what's the point of having dreams if you can't remember them? Psychologists explain that this seemingly unreasonable forgetfulness is caused by the inactivity of some parts of the brain during sleep. But that is not the truth. The real reason is that we see and hear things in our dreams that are forbidden to the human perception. In other words, things that are simply too much to bear for our minds and soul, and if we don't forget about them, they drive us insane. However, should you wake someone up in the midst of a dream, he will remember every bit of the dream he is having. You should never do this, because it may kill him. To illustrate my point, let me tell you about a strange experience I had 3 years ago. I was living in an apartment in downtown Sydney at the time. My roommate was a man named David. When we first met each other, he told me that many people had refused to share a suite with him because of his especially loud sleep-talking, but I didn't mind. You see, I had served in the Navy for 5 years. Then after over 1,800 nights of sleeping in a cabin right next to our ship's engine room, there was literally nothing loud enough to disturb me in my sleep. I told David so, and he was so pleased that he offered to pay 60% of the rent, which I gladly accepted. Our first 3 months together went extremely well. David was a great company. Not only was he a master cook, but a man of great compassion and humor as well. He wore the most friendly smile at all times and was always ready to engage in a pleasant conversation. As for his sleep-talking, well, frankly, I had to say that I heard none of it, because I am in the habit of going to bed before 11 p.m., while David usually stays up until 1 a.m. David would warn me never to wake him up while he's sleep-talking. I asked him why. I don't know. Instincts, I guess. He only shrugged. I agreed. With my usual schedule, it's not likely that I will ever get to hear him sleep talk anyway. However, after a few more months, the World Cup began. Now, as I've already told you, I'm usually accustomed to going to bed early, but I'm also one of your typical soccer fans who are always willing to stay up late for a game. That night, I bought a bag of snacks and some beer, and invited David to join me in cheering for the Australian team. He seemed quite disturbed by this. "Mark, I think I might as well skip the game. After all, I'm not too much of a soccer fan," he said hesitantly. "But the problem is, should you stay up tonight, you're bound to hear me sleep talking." "Don't worry, man. I'll just ignore you." That seemed to reassure him. "All right. Just remember, do not wake me up, whatever you hear." "Sure. Good night." The game that night was awesome, so awesome that it made me forget all about David and his sleep talking. However, at exactly 3 a.m. in the morning, a horrible moan from his room sent me bouncing off the sofa. It was the groan of souls trapped in hell, guttural, deep, and filled with despair. David's voice was pleasant and somewhat chirpy, but this was something else entirely. Keeping David's words in mind, I turned up the volume of the TV and tried to ignore the creepy groans coming out of his bedroom. It didn't work. The groans just grew louder and louder until they eventually merged into a steady, choked scream. Now you may wonder how I come to stay asleep with David making that much noise every night. But then again, that's because you've never been aboard a Navy warship. Have you ever heard the noise of a cruiser's engine? That was the loudest buzz anyone could imagine, booming like gunshots being fired right next to your ears. Now just think, as a Navy soldier, I'd spent 5 years living under that kind of noise. Now do you understand? After a while, when the groans had not stopped, I began to grow worried. What if David was having a heart attack and struggling for his life in the bedroom right now? I had to get in there and check on him. So I put down my beer and I ran towards his room. After knocking on the door for several times without getting any response, I turned the knob carefully and walked in. There lied David, with his face towards the door, and his expression was unspeakable. His bloodshot eyes seemed to be bulging out of his sockets, and his lips were upturned like that of a wild animal, revealing gritted teeth. His tongue lolled out of his mouth, dangling like the tongue of a man who'd hanged himself with a rope. Seeing this sight of horror confirmed my suspicion that there had been something wrong with my roommate, and that I had to rush him to the hospital as soon as possible. That's when I made the mistake of trying to wake him up. "Hey buddy, wake up, what the hell's wrong with you?" The change on his face was almost instant. The eyes narrowed and the bloodshot was gone. His tongue retracted into his mouth, and for a moment, there was my friend again, staring blankly up at me as if dumbfounded. Then all of a sudden, he leaped from his bed and started screaming, "My God! I saw! What the fuck did I see? Oh God! Oh God!" He screamed as he banged his head against the wall so hard it drew blood. I tried in vain to get a hold of him, but he was astonishingly strong. "I saw them, Mark! Oh, I saw them in my dreams, these things! They talked to me in my dreams, I could see them so clearly, they tortured me, and oh fuck! Those damn eyes, these hands!" He collapsed into the fetal position on the floor and began to weep like a boy. In the end, I called the hospital and they sent someone to pick him up. 2 weeks later, I read in the local newspaper that David had committed suicide in a mental institution. He had been staying awake for over 80 hours when he died, banging himself in the head or biting down hard on his arms whenever he fell asleep. He was afraid of them, the beings that haunted him in his dreams. Now, because of me, he could remember. If you caught your friend having a bad dream, you can't wake him. His blood will be on your hands. I had moved out of the apartment. Now I'd rented a smaller suite on the opposite side of the street. It's a humble place. The facilities are generally unagreeable, but at least it's a suite that I can afford to rent by myself. You see, the problem is that I have begun to sleep talk as well. Last week, my roommate complained that I'd sometimes groan horribly in my sleep and even beg and weep as if I was being tortured. And maybe, just maybe, they're now coming after me.